The night train shrieked to a halt, steel wheels grinding against frozen tracks, and the station exhaled a hiss of steam that curled white in the dim light. A pale moon hung above the weather-worn buildings, casting silver across the boards of the platform, where the few passengers stepped down with heavy boots and heavier hearts. Among them was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and towering over the rest, his hat brim shadowing a face carved by years of sun and wind. He carried no luggage beyond the rifle slung across his back, and the quiet aura of someone who had spent too long among cattle in silence. His name was spoken rarely, but his presence announced him before words ever could. He had come to town for supplies, nothing more, yet fate had its own ledger to balance. From the far edge of the platform came the soft sound of weeping, so faint it might have been mistaken for the wind. But he heard it. He always heard things others ignored. His gaze shifted and found her. A woman, young but with grief that aged her eyes, knelt on the splintered boards clutching a child so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The boy, no more than 6, hid his face in her dress, shivering from fear more than cold. She whispered in broken syllables, soothing in a language that most around them did not care to understand. Her dark hair, unpinned and tangled by travel, caught in the light of the gas lamps, and the sight of her drew more than passing looks. 2 men leaned against the post near the ticket booth, hats tilted, smirks twisting their mouths. Their laughter carried the sharp edge of cruelty. They watched her the way a predator watches prey, not with compassion but with a careless hunger of those who believe the world belongs only to them. The rancher paused mid-step, every instinct telling him to walk on, to let the town devour its own misery. But her sobs dug into him like thorns, awakening something he thought long buried beneath layers of dust and distance. The woman's clothes bore the stains of long travel, the hem of her dress torn from cinders and mud. The child's shoes were too small, cracked leather stretched from growth that poverty could not keep up with. No one stepped forward to help. Passengers looked away, pretending not to see. The station master busied himself with paperwork, his shoulders stiff with indifference. Only the jeers of the 2 men filled the silence. One spat on the ground and muttered a word meant to cut. She flinched as if struck. The rancher's boots echoed across the platform as he approached. His size alone was enough to shift the air. Conversations dimmed, the laughter thinned. He crouched down slowly so as not to frighten her, his frame folding like a mountain bending low. His voice was gravel but quiet, meant for her ears and not the crowd's. He asked if she was alone. She lifted her face, eyes red from tears, and managed a nod. The child peeked out, wary yet curious of this giant shadow shielding them. Before more could be said, the 2 men moved closer, swagger in their steps, words slurred from whiskey. One reached down and grabbed the woman's arm as if she were luggage left unattended. The boy cried out. The rancher's hand shot forward, clamping down on the man's wrist with a grip like iron. A single twist, and the drunk yelped, stumbling back. The second man squared his shoulders, but one glance into the rancher's cold, unflinching eyes made his bravado falter. The rancher rose to his full height, towering above them, and said just 5 words, each heavy enough to crush stone. "She's leaving with me." The platform went silent. The words hung in the steam and smoke, a declaration as clear as a gunshot. No one dared laugh now. The men cursed under their breath, but neither found the courage to push further. They backed away, muttering threats that dissolved into the night. Still, the damage was done. Whispers spread like wildfire among the onlookers. Everyone saw what had happened. Everyone understood what it meant. By taking her side, the rancher had drawn a line in the date, and there would be those eager to erase it with blood. He turned back to her. The women trembled, not from his presence, but from the knowledge of what defiance cost in this land. He offered his hand. For a long breath, she stared, torn between fear of a stranger and fear of being alone. Then, with a resolve born from desperation, she placed her palm in his. The child clung to her, following as the rancher led them away from the station lights into the uncertain dark beyond. The road out of town stretched before them, dust settling on his coat and on the boy's hair as the wind picked up. The rancher did not speak much. He never had, but his mind churned with questions. Why had he done it? Why risk the quiet life he had carved out of hard land and harder labor? Yet he could not shake the image of her tears, nor the way her body shielded the child against the world. It reminded him of another night, years past, when his own family had been taken by sickness and left him staring at an empty cabin, his heart a hollow echo. Perhaps he had been waiting, unknowingly, for a reason to stand again. Behind them, lamps flickered in windows as the town settled. But not all slept. Those who had witnessed the defiance carried tales to others less forgiving. Already, plans were forming. The rancher knew this. He could almost feel the weight of eyes in the dark, tracking his steps, hungry for retribution. They reached the edge of town where his horse waited tied to a post. He lifted the child with ease, setting him gently in the saddle, then helped the woman climb up. She clutched the boy to her chest, her hands trembling but steady enough to hold him safe. The rancher untied the reins and walked beside them, boots crunching against gravel. He would not ride. Not yet. He wanted the ground beneath his feet, the sense of movement under his control. The night deepened, stars piercing the sky, the prairie opening before them like an ocean of shadow. The only sounds were the horse's hooves and the distant call of a coyote. The woman finally spoke, her voice halting, words pieced together in broken English. She said thank you, softly, almost inaudible. He gave no reply beyond a small nod. He did not help for gratitude. He helped because the alternative was to watch cruelty flourish unchecked, and he had already done enough of that in his lifetime. They traveled until the station lights were long gone, swallowed by horizon and memory. Yet danger was not left behind. The rancher knew the men would not forgive humiliation, not in a town where pride weighed more than justice. Trouble would follow, certain as sunrise. He glanced at the woman and child, fragile, exhausted, yet holding a thread of courage, and he wondered if he was strong enough to shield them against what was coming. The wind carried a whisper through the grass, and he stopped, scanning the dark. Nothing moved, yet the feeling lingered that they were not alone. He rested a hand on the rifle at his back, senses sharp. The woman noticed, her body tensing, but he gestured for calm. For now, the shadows kept their secrets. Still, the unease remained. The prairie unfolded before them in endless waves of grass, each blade bending in the cold wind like a restless sea, and the road that cut through it seemed less a path for travelers than a scar across a land that had never asked for taming. The giant rancher walked alongside his horse, one hand steady on the reins, the other near the rifle slung over his shoulder. In the saddle, the Chinese woman held her son close, her posture rigid, her face pale from exhaustion yet set with determination that was not easily broken. Behind them the town had disappeared into distance, but the memory of the station still clung like smoke, and with it the certainty that men would follow. He did not speak of it aloud, but every sense in him waited for the sound of hoofbeats in the wind. The woman shifted in the saddle, her hands trembling as she adjusted the boy's weight. He had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his breath soft but shallow, the kind of sleep children take when fear has drained them to their core. She glanced down at the rancher, her eyes filled with a question she did not yet know how to ask. His gaze met hers briefly, and though no words passed between them, something unspoken bridged the silence, a fragile thread of trust woven through necessity. Hours passed, and the land changed from open plain to rolling hills marked by stands of cottonwoods and willow. The road narrowed, its edges muddy from recent rains, and the horse struggled for footing in places where wagon wheels had carved deep ruts. Clouds gathered thick in the sky, the kind that promise a storm without asking permission, and the wind turned sharp. The rancher halted, scanning the horizon where shadows pooled beneath the darkening heavens. His jaw tightened. Storms in the open could swallow a man whole, and with a woman and child under his protection, the margin for error had vanished. They pressed forward until they reached the banks of a wide river swollen with rain. The current churned with a violence that promised no safe crossing. The rancher paced along the edge, searching for a shallower stretch, but every place he looked, the river answered with the same roar. The woman watched him, her expression etched with worry, then slid carefully from the saddle, keeping her son in her arms. She crouched at the edge of the water, as if listening. The rancher frowned but said nothing, only noting the calm in her movements. She reached down, cupping a handful of water, tasting it, then shaking her head. He realized she was judging the current not only with her eyes but with instincts born of survival. She stood and nodded toward a bend downstream where the water frothed less violently against the rocks. He followed, surprised by her keen perception, and for the first time allowed himself to acknowledge she was more than a burden to be shielded. She was survivor in her own right. At the bend, he unfastened the supplies lashed to the saddle, securing them with rawhide cord across his back. He tied the woman's skirt at the knees to keep it from tangling in the current, then lifted the child into his arms. The boy clung to his neck, eyes wide as the river hissed and snapped like a living thing. The woman stepped beside him, refusing to be left behind. Together they waded into the water. The current struck hard, tugging at legs, threatening to drag them under, but the rancher planted each step like he was driving stakes into the riverbed itself. The woman stumbled once, nearly swept away, yet she gritted her teeth and pressed on, her hands gripping the horse's bridle for balance. By the time they reached the far bank, soaked and shivering, exhaustion had carved lines into their faces, but they were alive. The rancher lowered the child gently onto the grass, and the woman collapsed beside him, her chest heaving. For a long time none of them spoke. The storm broke overhead then, rain pouring down in cold sheets, but beneath the misery of it there was a strange flicker of triumph. When night came, they built a fire beneath the shelter of an overhanging rock. The flames licked upward, crackling against the rain, and the scent of wet earth mixed with smoke. The rancher broke hard bread, passing a portion to the woman and child. At first she hesitated, then accepted with a bow of her head. The boy nibbled quietly, his eyes darting from the giant man to the fire, as if uncertain which to trust more. The rancher studied them in the firelight, their faces softened by the glow, and for the first time allowed himself to ask who they were beyond victims of cruelty. The woman tried to speak, piecing words together in English rough with accent and gaps, but enough to shape her past. Her husband, she said, had come west with a railroad, working the dangerous blasts and spikes that carved tracks through mountains. He had never returned from a day's labor when men were attacked, driven out, left broken by mobs who saw them as less than human. She had been told to leave, to vanish, to go back where she came from, but there was nothing to return to. The boy was all she had. Her story carried no embellishment, no plea for pity, only fact, delivered with the quiet strength of someone who had lived too much loss to waste tears on strangers. The rancher listened, the firelight catching the shadows in his eyes. He told nothing of himself. Not yet, but her story clawed at old scars he thought long sealed. He stared into the flames and saw his own wife's face, pale with fever, lips cracked as she whispered for him to live on. He had buried her beneath the cottonwoods on his land, then locked his grief in silence, choosing cattle and solitude over the risk of connection. Now, in the woman's halting words, he felt that silence break just a little. When the boy finished eating, he reached into his small bundle and pulled out a carved figure, rough but careful, shaped like a bird. He held it out to the rancher with shy hands. The giant stared at it, then at the boy's hopeful eyes, before accepting. He turned the carving over in his fingers, noting the tiny imperfections, the marks of a child's effort, and for the first time in years his lips curved into something close to a smile. The fire dwindled, and sleep came fitfully. Yet in the dark beyond the flames, eyes watched. A figure lingered at the tree line, silent, motionless. He was tall, wrapped in leather and fur, his face painted in shadow, a bow slung across his back. The rancher stirred at the faint crunch of leaves, rising with rifle in hand, scanning the night. But when he looked, the figure melted into the woods, leaving only the whisper of his presence. The rancher did not wake the others, though unease settled deep in his chest. Morning brought clear skies, but no peace. As they traveled through a stretch of pine woods, the air carried the sharp scent of smoke. The rancher halted, listening. Horses approached. The woman tensed, clutching her son. From between the trees emerged riders, 3 men from the station, faces twisted with a memory of humiliation, guns glinting. They reined in their mounts, blocking the road, their laughter cold. The leader called out a slur, demanding the woman be handed over. The rancher stepped forward, rifle raised, his body a wall between her and them. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. A gun cocked. The boy whimpered. Then, from the trees, an arrow sang through the air and struck the ground at the hooves of the lead rider's horse, sending the animal rearing. The men cursed, firing blindly into the shadows. The warrior stepped into sight, bow drawn, eyes unblinking. His presence alone shifted the balance. The rancher seized a moment, firing once, a warning shot that shattered bark inches from the second rider's head. Panic broke them. The men wheeled their horses, retreating into the wood with threats flung over their shoulders. Silence returned, broken only by the horses' uneasy snorts. The warrior did not vanish this time. He stood at the edge of the clearing, gaze fixed on the rancher, measuring him. The rancher lowered his rifle but did not step aside. For a long breath they studied one another, 2 men bound by different worlds yet standing in the same fight. The warrior gave a slight nod, then turned back into the forest without a word. That night, as they sat by the fire, the woman looked at the rancher with new eyes. He had shielded them not only with strength, but with resolve that seemed carved from stone. Yet he also knew the battle was far from over. The riders would return, and not alone. The path ahead wound deeper into wilderness, and now shadows walked beside them, some threatening, some mysterious. The boy curled against his mother, clutching the carved bird. The rancher stared into the fire once more, its glow flickering across his scarred face, and thought of the warrior's silent nod. An ally, perhaps, or a danger yet to be revealed. Either way, the road through the wilderness had only begun, and it carried them all toward a reckoning none could yet see. The flames crackled, the night deepened, and in the hush of the forest the future pressed closer, inevitable as dawn. Dawn broke red across the horizon, the sky painted with fire that mirrored the unease in the rancher's chest. He had slept little, his body aching from the journey, his mind sharpened by the knowledge that silence never lasted long in these lands. The woman stirred near the coals of last night's fire, her son tucked safely against her side, while the forest whispered with a stillness that carried more weight than wind alone. The warrior had not returned since the ambush in the pines, yet the rancher felt his presence like a shadow stitched to the edges of the wilderness, waiting, watching, testing. He knew it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again, not as strangers, but as allies forced into the same fire. The rancher rose, checked his rifle, and scanned the tree line. He had spent years relying only on himself, but the road had shifted him, scraped away layers of distance until the truth of his own loneliness was laid bare. Protecting this woman and her boy had opened a wound he thought scarred shut, the memory of his wife's last breath, her hand clutching his, her voice urging him to guard others when he no longer believed he had the strength. Now that vow whispered through him again, unrelenting. He felt it in the weight of the rifle, in the fragile trust in the woman's eyes, in the small carved bird resting near the child's hand. They broke camp and moved west, the prairie unfolding into rolling grasslands punctuated by rocky ridges. The woman walked beside the horse now, refusing to let the rancher bear all the burden. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her pace measured but steady. The boy, more alert with each mile, asked questions in soft words, some in English, some in his mother's tongue, his curiosity flickering despite fear. The rancher answered what he could with gestures and short sentences, surprising himself with a patience he thought he had lost long ago. By midday the clouds gathered heavy and low, dark as bruises. The air thickened, charged with the promise of violence. The rancher felt it first, a shift in the wind, the distant tremor of hooves. He froze, hand lifted. The woman stilled instantly, clutching her son. From the ridgeline came riders, half a dozen at first, then more, shadows swelling into a tide of hostility. The same men from town, now multiplied, their faces set with vengeance, their weapons gleaming in the weak sun. The rancher's stomach knotted. He counted quickly. Too many. The rifle in his hand could buy time, but not victory. He glanced at the woman, then at the child, and knew retreat was impossible. They would have to stand. The riders closed in, circling, voices raised in cruel laughter. The leader dismounted, spitting into the date, and called out for the woman, his words dripping venom. He promised mercy if she came quietly, but his eyes betrayed the lie. The rancher stepped forward, rifle aimed, his body a wall between her and them. His silence was his answer. The men moved to attack, but before the first shot cracked the air, an arrow sliced through the wind and buried itself in a rider's shoulder. He screamed, toppling from his horse. From the ridge emerged a warrior, bow drawn, eyes fierce, his presence commanding the moment. Another arrow flew, precise, scattering the riders. The rancher seized the opening, firing his rifle, dropping one of the attackers. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men cursed, the air thick with smoke and the thunder of gunfire. The woman dragged her son behind a boulder, shielding him with her body, yet she did not cower. When one rider broke from the circle and charged toward them, she seized a fallen branch, swinging with desperate strength, striking his face and buying enough time for the warrior's knife to finish what her courage had begun. Blood darkened the grass, the scream swallowed by the raw battle. The rancher fought like a storm unleashed. Each shot deliberate, each movement carved from years of survival. Yet numbers pressed in. A bullet tore into his shoulder, spinning him, pain flooding his senses, but he gritted his teeth and stood unbroken. He felt the old rage rise, the memory of every loss, every cruelty left unchecked, and he answered with fury. His rifle cracked, his fist struck, his body became the barricade no one could breach. The warrior moved with equal ferocity, both giving way to blade when the fight closed in tight. His strikes were swift, silent, lethal. Between them, the rancher and the warrior carved space, each man filling the gaps of the other's defense. The woman, clutching her son, tended to the wounded as she could, pressing cloth to the rancher's bleeding shoulder between the chaos, her touch steady even as fear trembled in her bones. The fight dragged into minutes that felt like hours. Smoke choked the air. Horses screamed. The barn they had taken shelter near caught fire, flames leaping skyward, consuming drywood with crackling hunger. The blaze lit the battlefield, turning faces into masks of fury and fear. The rancher staggered, his strength fading, but the warriors had pulled him upright, their eyes meeting in unspoken oath. Neither would yield. At last, the tie broke. The settlers, blooded and beaten, faltered. Their leader, wild-eyed, charged with pistol raised, but the rancher met him head-on, seizing his arm, twisting until bones snapped. The man collapsed, his scream drowned by the roar of the burning barn. Those still standing pulled him back, retreating into the dark with curses on their lips and hatred in their eyes, leaving behind their dead. The prairie fell silent save for the crackle of flames and the ragged breaths of the survivors. The rancher lowered his rifle, every muscle trembling. Smoke stung his eyes. The warrior stood beside him, chest rising with calm control, though blood streaked his arm. The woman emerged from behind the boulder, her son clutching her skirt, his small face pale but unbroken. She looked at the rancher, then the warrior, and for the first time since the station her tears came not from fear but from relief. She bowed her head, a gesture of respect that needed no translation. The rancher sank to one knee, his wounded shoulder screaming, his strength finally giving way. The woman knelt beside him, pressing cloth tighter to the wound, whispering words he barely understood but felt nonetheless. The boy stepped closer, offering the carved bird once more, placing it gently into the rancher's blooded hand. The gesture struck deeper than any wound. He closed his fist around it, his vision blurring with more than smoke. When the flames dwindled to embers, silence stretched long. The warrior finally spoke, his voice low, steady. He told the rancher this fight was not the end. Others would come. Hatred did not die with the men left behind. The rancher knew it was true. His land was no longer safe, not for the woman, not for the boy, not for himself. A choice pressed upon him, heavy and undeniable. He looked at them, the warrior, silent but steadfast, the woman, weary yet unbroken, the boy, clutching hope in the shape of a small carving. He realized the road ahead was not meant to be walked alone. His life of solitude, the fences he had built around his grief, all seemed hollow in the face of what they had survived together. His wife's last words echoed again. Protect. Not cattle, not land, but lives. With dawn rising once more, he made his decision. He would not leave them. He would not send them away to face the world alone. He would ride with them, guide them to safer lands, perhaps even carve out a place where they might breathe without fear. It would cost him everything familiar, but for the first time in years he felt the cost worth paying. The woman met his gaze, and though she said nothing, she understood. The warrior gave a single nod, as if acknowledging the path chosen. The boy smiled faintly, his innocence stubborn against the scars of the world. Together, they turned from the smoking ruin, stepping into the uncertain horizon. The rancher's heart was no longer hollow. It carried weight now, fragile, precious, alive. And though the road ahead promised more trials, he walked it not as a man alone, but as one bound by trust, by blood not of kin but of survival. The wilderness stretched endless before them, and with it, the reckoning of choices made. And so the story pressed onward, into lands unknown, where hope and danger would forever walk side by side.